At the February 2025 meeting of the Tennessee Valley Civil War Roundtable, our guest speaker was Dr. Curt Fields, who has earned a reputation as one of the top Civil War living historians in our country today. Since his appearance before our roundtable fell on the anniversary of the Battle of Fort Donelson, Dr. Fields' presentation was titled, Grant at Donelson, Learning on the Job.
Who is we have a partnership with the Elks Lodge. They set up the room for us. They make sure that there's a buffet on the night that we meet, and we really do appreciate the partnership. Now for our guest of honor, Dr. Curt Fields, aka General Grant. He's portrayed General Grant in 22 states. This is his 4th visit to the Tennessee Valley Civil War Roundtable. We're really honored to have him here again. We're honored every time he comes back. His forthcoming book, Unconditional Surrender, can be pre-ordered on Amazon, and I'm going to say it wrong.
Savis Beatty.
Savis Beatty.
Like Ned Beatty.
There you go, thank you.
And that's in the Big Red One and hit Normandy.
And that'll come out September 15th, so be watching for that new book, Unconditional Surrender, about General Grant. Did you know that Curt Fields was a police officer in Memphis, and he served on the hostage negotiation team. He received a life-saving award from the city for his actions in the line of duty, and he can be reached at the most unique email address, Curt Fields at generalgrantbyhimself.com. Tonight, his surprise topic coincides with a special commemoration. This happens to be the same day, February 15th, that the Battle of Fort Donelson began. It was an early victory for Brigadier General Grant, and the title of his presentation is Fort Donelson, Learning on the Job. May I present Dr. Fields, General Grant.
Madam President, and I understand this is your first evening as Madam President. You did well. Well, this is the 4th time, I knew I'd been here a few times, but it's the 4th time that I have been here. And you folks still ask me back. I'm honored and privileged. This is a venerable and distinguished roundtable. And to be a speaker here is indeed an honor. 4 times is beyond words. I was talking to a couple of folks before we came in here, and I wanted to tell you what I told them. I have been here enough times that I feel I've gone way past doing the presentation. It's a conversation. And the way this is set up, it's like being in your living room. But I promise I will not wear out my welcome and let you get out of here, because I have long discovered, President Lincoln told me, he said, General, when you're talking to folks, first of all, don't wear out your welcome. And also remember that there is a direct connection between your brain and your buttocks. And when one gets numb, the other one gets numb. Now, Colonel Rizika is my aide-de-camp this night, and he will advise me when my time grows short. It is good. We were there to Paducah, and we got off the boat, or the boats, about daylight, and marched into Paducah. That same landing is still there this day, I understand. And I got the bands. Now, I am tone deaf. Music is noise to me. I don't like music. In fact, I really don't like military music. And I had those bands, and I put a band in front of each regiment. And I said, you play as loud as you can play. Let them know we are here. They were thrilled to do that. So they marched up in front of the regiments marched up, and all the ladies were in the windows on the second floor, and they're waving their handkerchiefs, and all the men were waving, and huzzah, hurrah, hurrah, because they thought that Leonidas Pope was coming with 3,000 Confederates. Now, when they started hearing these Union songs, that gave them some consternation, and then they recognized the uniforms, and it wasn't who they were expecting. Well, all the windows, the shutters closed up, the hankies went away. They were still waving, but this time they weren't holding all 5 fingers, and gave us that welcome. Well, when I got back to Cairo, I had a message. I had 2 messages from General Fremont. He said, take Paducah if you think you can. And I already had. But I also had a deciphered message that Fremont had sent to us in Hungarian. He had a Hungarian officer somewhere on that staff, I guess, in St. Louis. And to be in cipher and code, he knew nobody would be able to read it, and he was correct, because we couldn't read it. Somebody found somebody who could read Hungarian. And it said, take Paducah if you can. So, Colonel, I have fond memories of our European friends who came over and fought the fight with us. Well, Fort Donelson. On the 13th, and I'm going to say this and back up just a moment. It was about this time at Fort Donelson in the evening of the 13th that the rain turned to sleet. And then it turned to snow. And then it really began coming down. Temperatures dropped to 12 degrees over the hills there around Fort Donelson, the 15 acres or so of the fort itself on the river. The fort total is about 100 acres. And they had, the rebels had about 15 acres of emplacements dug in on the ridges of the hills, and it's all up and down hill. So it was about this very moment that the temperature dropped to 12 or 10 degrees. The wind chill factor, the people in the weather service up in Washington tell me that there's something about it's really colder than the temperature when the wind blows across you. That's all I know about wind chill, and they were saying the wind chill is 10 below zero. Well, having said that, I want to tell you how I got there. I had been wanting to go down the Tennessee and the Cumberland River. You well know here about the Tennessee River and how important it is to navigation. So this is your front yard, why it is of great import to you. And the reason, also, Fort Henry was on the Tennessee, Fort Donelson was on the Cumberland. The Cumberland is a little known river, but it goes right into and past Nashville, Tennessee, which was a tremendous distribution point. Thousands of tons of freight and now war material, artillery and so forth is coming through Nashville, Tennessee and going further south to be dispersed among Confederate forces. The reason, and it ties in with Paducah, now this is, I started moving on Donelson on February the 3rd of 62. I took Paducah on September the 7th of 61. But Paducah could not be allowed to fall into Confederate hands because right there at Paducah, you've got where the Ohio River flows into the Mississippi. And just a few miles away, you've got where the Tennessee River flows into the Ohio and the Mississippi. And then just a few miles away, you've got the Cumberland that flows into the Tennessee and then into the Ohio and the Mississippi. So the Army controlling Paducah controls the mouths or the nexus of those three rivers. It would be devastating for the Union not to have control of those three rivers. Now, I had been advocating to General Halleck, Henry Wager Halleck, and it's pronounced Wager. It looks like it's Wager, but it's a German family name, and they pronounce it with a hard G, Henry Wager Halleck. Old brains, bulgy-eyed fella, always rubbing his elbows. It's his nervous habit. And the more he rubbed, the more you knew he was nervous. Well, I'd been saying I wanted to go and take Fort Henry and Donelson, because Fremont had, back in December, had sent us on a diversion movement. And I went down the west side of the Mississippi, and General Charles Ferguson Smith went down the east side of the Mississippi to keep Leonidas Pope busy, not knowing what we were going to do. When we got back, and I despise that movement. It wears out the troops, it wears out the horses and the mules, it wears out the equipment, and it serves little to no purpose. Except with this, Charles Ferguson Smith, and you always say Charles Ferguson Smith. He was about as tall as John Scales back there. In a world of men who were 5'6", I'm 5'8". Average height of a man in the Civil War is 5'6", 5'7". Charles Ferguson Smith was my commandant of cadets when I was at the academy. And when he stood up, he unfolded like a carpenter rule. And he was the soldier's soldier. 6 feet 4 inches tall, skinny as a rail, looked like a praying mantis. Well, Smith is now under my command. And I spoke with him. He was my mentor. I could not believe I'm in command of Charles Ferguson Smith, who is now also a brigadier general. But I ranked him. And I spoke with him. I said, General, I am not comfortable giving you orders. He said, Grant, you do what you've got to do. You tell me what you want me to do, and I will do it. Think nothing of rank. Think nothing of the past. We are what we are today, doing what we are doing today. Yes, sir, General. So Smith, Charles Ferguson Smith, comes back to me after that diversionary attack. He said, you know, there's a place down there on the Tennessee River that they've named Fort Henry. And it's right on the water. And it's probably going to flood, which it did. And I can take Fort Henry. And after we take Fort Henry, we can move that 12 miles, just 12 miles, and get over to Fort Donelson and take Donelson, and we will control the Tennessee and the Cumberland River. And I started advocating that to General Halleck. He didn't like it. He rebuffed me, embarrassed me, told me I went to St. Louis. He cut me off in this sentence, go back to your post. I thought I'd said something unmilitary. In the next few days, though, I had Andrew Hull Foote, Commodore Andrew Hull Foote, one of the first rear admirals in the Navy. But Admiral Foote, with the Mississippi River Squadron, was in the Mississippi River Flotilla, and he had these ironclads, and nobody knew what to do with them. They were these brand new boats, gun platforms, and nobody knew what to do with an ironclad boat that's 170 feet long, 50 feet wide, and draws a 6-8 foot drag. Mounts 13, 14 guns. What, 4 on the front, 2 on the back, and 4 down each side. And they're a brand new weapon. And Hull is in command, Andrew Hull Foote's in command. He liked me. He didn't really like West Point graduates, but he liked me. And he started telling Halleck, we need to take Fort Donelson and Fort Henry. And Halleck is still not wanting to do that. See, I found out after the fact, Halleck could not abide me. He thought he was my intellectual superior, my social superior, and certainly my military superior. He was also dealing with Don Carlos Buell, who's a major general over in north central Tennessee with the Army of the Ohio. And he viewed Buell as a threat to his career. Now, I'm sure that's not going on now with the United States Army. And then George McClellan, Little Mac, who is about 5'6", Sheridan is 5'5", McClellan is 5'6". McClellan is now General-in-Chief from, I think, November to February. He's General-in-Chief. And Halleck views him as a threat. And he views me as a threat. But the President, on February the 27th, issued Presidential General Order Number 1. And it said, all United States military forces and naval forces are to, as soon, he didn't give a specific date, he wanted it in February, are to move immediately upon the enemy. Everybody get up, do something. Even if it's wrong, do something. Because the war has been going on since April the 12th, and this is of 61, this is January of 62, and nobody's doing much of anything. And the President said, I'm going to light a fire under them. They've got to do something. Well, that came down to Halleck. And then Buell got to moving and edging over a little further west from north central Nashville. Halleck was concerned that Buell might get into play here. McClellan, we don't know what McClellan was thinking, but McClellan is wanting to reap the glory of a victory. So when Andrew Hull Foote sent Halleck a note, several notes, and said, we need to do this, Halleck said, oh, it's a great idea. Send it to me on January the 30th, move as soon as you can. The next day, we were moving. We had 4 ironclads and 3 timberclads. And the timberclads would stay behind the ironclads and lodge shells over them. So Foote and I were going to do a joint Army-Navy operation. He was going to steam down the Tennessee River there to Fort Henry, and I was going to take 15,000 troops in an arc around behind them and come in from the land side of Fort Henry, while Foote comes in and hits them from the riverside. Now, it's been raining off and on for days. Now, when you take a tube of a cannon that weighs 1,000 to 1,500 pounds and put it in one of those carriages, and you get 4 mules or horses pulling it and the caisson, and you get those army wagons with 4 mules or horses pulling them, and you get 15,000 men with 30,000 feet on a muddy road, in just a few minutes it becomes a quagmire. So we were slow. Moreover, I had to move my troops in echelon. I had them up around Paducah, and I had to send half of them down, and then McClernand, who wants my job, making it clear, he's a congressman from Illinois, and he's very good friends with President Lincoln. And he will not miss an opportunity to tell you he's very good friends with President Lincoln. But McClernand, I sent him down with about half the force, and I stayed there near Paducah. When the boats get back, we moved down to where we could stage. We got off the boats and on the land, and we start our march. The idea was to meet with Foote, and it was going to be a joint operation. The way it turned out, Foote steams up to Fort Henry. They opened fire. They had 11 guns, and in about 90 minutes, maybe not that long, they disabled every gun, wounded, I think, 16 men. There were only about 90 men in the fort. They had 4,000 that were actually in the trenches there around the fort. But when those 4 ironclads opened up with 32 and 64-pound guns at about a 500-yard range, those men were ready to leave those trenches. And Tillman said, go to Donelson and join the garrison there. And they didn't need to hear it a second time. So Tillman surrenders with his 90 men, and by the time I got to the fort, they were already had secured all their weapons on the boats, and it was over. And Commodore Foote actually apologized to me. That's not an issue, Commodore. That's not an issue. We got the victory. It does not matter who got it. We got it. So I had told Halleck, this is on the 6th of February. I sent a telegram to General Halleck, I'm going to take Fort Donelson on the 8th. I learned that time, do not send your commanding officer things that you are going to do. It does not bid well, because the heavens opened again and it rained steadily for the next 3 days. Now, on the Confederate side, on the 6th of February, when I'm there at Henry, wanting to move that 12 miles to the east, Bushrod Johnson is in command, Brigadier General Bushrod Johnson. Ever heard of Bushrod? Bushrod Johnson. He fought the whole war and lived to fight another day. But Bushrod is in command of Fort Donelson. Now I need to give you a little bit of overall picture. Sidney Johnston, the highest ranking officer in the Confederate Army, highest ranking officer in either army, is charged with defending the South. And he's got a defensive line that runs all the way from across the river over into the Trans-Mississippi Theater to the Appalachian Mountains. It's a 1,000-mile long defensive line. In reality, though, it went from the Mississippi to the Appalachian Mountains, several hundred miles. He's got, I think in the theater, he had 60,000, 70,000 men for essentially the whole South. It was untenable. The center of his defensive line was Bowling Green, Kentucky. So when I took Fort Henry and was going to move across to Fort Donelson, Johnston surprised me. Johnston sends word to Fort Donelson, hold out long enough that I can get behind. You got Fort Donelson, you got the Cumberland River and Fort Donelson, Bowling Green, north, and going. He said, give me enough time to get my troops from Bowling Green and environs into Nashville, Tennessee. It turns out Johnston never intended to hold Donelson, which was a grave mistake on his part. I am careful to pass that kind of judgment, but I am comfortable in telling you it was a grave mistake on the part of Albert Sidney Johnston. He gave up all of Kentucky, all of West Tennessee, and most of Middle Tennessee, falling from Bowling Green down through Tennessee to the southern border of Tennessee, which is what, that way, just a few miles, without firing a shot. And then there were hounds for his head, justifiably. And that's when his friend Jefferson Davis said, if General Johnston is not a general, we have no general. Well, Bushrod Johnson is put in command of Donelson. Bushrod's all right, I don't know him personally. But then 2 days later, Gideon Pillow is sent to be the commanding officer at Fort Donelson. Now Gideon Pillow, there aren't many men in the war of whom I will openly speak disdainfully. But I will tell you, I was not in the least worried about facing Gideon Pillow. Gideon Pillow in the Mexican War was a general even then. He got appointed, Mr. Polk, President Polk had poked the Mexicans enough until he started his war. And Pillow's a general. But Gideon Pillow built his breastworks, and he dug the trench on the enemy side of the breastworks. That's not good. he got a little a spent ball, hit him on his heel and bruised his heel. And he parlayed that into, I think he got a medal for being wounded. It was a catastrophic wound by the time Pillow got through talking about it. So I wasn't worried about Pillow. Well, then 2 days later, the 8th or 9th of February, John Floyd is sent down there by President Davis. Now that means they've had 3 command changes in 6 days. And I charge you in your reading, because all of you here this night are readers and studiers, you're students. I charge you, ere the next time I am privileged to stand before you, to read about Fort Donelson, what I am telling you. And you will see how important Fort Donelson was. And what a grievous, I think, what a grievous mistake it was that Johnston gave it up. However, John Floyd, he's a name you probably don't recognize. Perhaps you do. Secretary of War under James Buchanan. And Buchanan walks out the back door of the White House and Lincoln walks in the front. Buchanan sat on his hands for 4 years. I voted for Buchanan. He's the only person, the only time I ever voted. In 1856, I had not voted until 1856, and I voted for James Buchanan. Now, I like to tell people, I voted for Buchanan because I didn't know Buchanan, but I did know Fremont. But the reality is, I was hoping, well, I knew if Fremont got into the executive mansion, I thought he might provoke a war. I won't go so far as to say he'd start a war, but I was gravely concerned that Fremont would cause some real military problems that did not need to be caused. I was still hoping that cooler heads would prevail. So Buchanan gets in, and I rued the day I voted for him, because what he did not do created significantly to what ultimately happened. But John Floyd has no military experience. But now he's in command of what is the most important emplacement in the Confederacy. And they got 21,000 men in there, and getting more. So we went from Bushrod to Gideon to John Floyd. Oh, and then as Sidney Johnston falls back, Simon Bolivar Buckner, my good friend, Simon Bolivar Buckner comes to, well, he went back to Bowling Green to get command of his troops, because he knew something was happening, and he was wanting to move away from Bowling Green. But when he got to Bowling Green, his troops were gone. And he said, "Where's my command?" And they said, "Oh, they went down to Fort Donelson, and that's where you're going too." This was not good news for Simon Buckner, because he could not abide Gideon Pillow. See, back before the war, Pillow run for the Senate from Tennessee. And Simon Bolivar Buckner wrote a lot of letters to the editor. And Pillow lost the race for U.S. Senate. And at that time, the legislatures voted for him. And he blamed Buckner for his losing the Senate. They almost had a duel. And now Buckner's got to go to Fort Donelson and be under Gideon Pillow's command. It was not good. Morale was not good in the leadership in that fort. And they're coming in pretty, as I understood what I could get from my spies and my scouts, they were bringing in numbers, not rolling them up. We'll be able to ride up to a pistol shot of that fort, and we will suffer no harm. Well, there was some mumbling and grumbling and rattling of binocular cases with that, but we rode on, 12, 15 of us. And sure enough, we rode up to in sight of those trenches, earthworks on the ridges, and sat our horses, a group of federal officers, nobody raised a musket. I did take great pleasure in saying, see, I told you we could do that. I suspect we could probably ride right up to those earthworks if we really wanted to, but we're not going to. So we took a look and rode back. I wanted to get moving on the 10th, we couldn't. The 11th, we couldn't. It takes about 3 days for the road to dry enough to support the weight of guns and the wagons. So it was still muddy, but we waited until the 12th. Now, in the morning daybreak of the 12th, we started moving. Now, you should know there are 2 roads that run from the river, from Fort Henry, the Tennessee River, to Dover, Tennessee. There's the Ridge Road, which oddly enough runs along a ridge, and there's a telegraph road that goes. The Ridge Road went into the fort, and the telegraph road went into the Dover. And places they're 3 or 4 miles apart, but most of the time they're almost within sight of each other. So I wasn't concerned about dividing my forces. And McClernand takes the south side on the Ridge Road, and I rode with my troops, the other half of the troops, on the telegraph road. In fact, John Brenton was my surgeon. And he had a big black horse, big fellow, prancing and dancing. He knew something was up. Horses know something's up. And this horse was skittering and dancing and just prancing under Brenton. And he rode out and got out in front of me. And he could look back and see me, and I said, Dr. Brenton, John Brenton, I said, I believe I'm in command of this army, and I think I'll go first, if you don't mind. And he was crestfallen until he saw that I was only jesting with him, and he reined up and fell back and rode beside me. He later went on to begin, he went back to Philadelphia. He graduated from the Jefferson Medical School in Philadelphia and began the Army Medical Museum. So John Brenton was the man that started all of that, and he was my surgeon for a while through Shiloh. Well, we moved and we got on the way. It was a beautiful day. Now this is February the 12th. I'm moving 15,000 men. Now I was going in the face of military thinking. I was going to attack a force that outnumbered mine 6,000 to 7,000 men, but I didn't care. And my forces were somewhat divided, but not much. And we were moving against a superior force, but I felt that 15,000 men on the 12th of February would be worth 50,000 men a month later. And I was going to hit whoever was in command before they had a chance to hit me. But on that road, sun comes out, and I've got all these Midwestern boys. I had 6 regiments coming in from Nebraska. Colonel Thayer from Nebraska got there just as we were leaving. And I said, get on, stay on the boats, have Henry Captain walk with the Navy, convoy you up at a location near the fort and disembark there. I also, on the road, I sent back word to General Wallace, who had 2,500 men at Fort Henry. I said, bring your men up too. So I had close to 10,000 men coming, other than the 15,000 that I had, because Thayer adding those 6 regiments was a tremendous increase in manpower. So we're marching. Beautiful day. All these Midwestern boys think, well, this is wintertime down south. Began shucking all those brand new gray coats. I've got a respiratory problem that causes me to cough occasionally. And they took them off, and the journalists would have you think they just threw them on the side of the road. No. They took off their coats and their blankets. We stacked them, left an older man a sergeant there with them and said, we'll send back later and get them. So we get to Fort Donelson about midday on the 12th, fanned out. Indian Creek on the south, all the way up. I got McClernand down there with several thousand. Spread them out. I got Charles Ferguson Smith up here with the 2nd Iowa, up north by Hickman Creek, which is flooding. Then Colonel Thayer comes in with his 6,000-8,000, and Lew Wallace, and I put Lew Wallace in the middle. So as you're looking at me, you got Charles Ferguson Smith, Lew Wallace, and John McClernand. And I said, do not bring on any engagement. Well, McClernand has a battery firing at him. And he decided, well, he told me it was irritating me. He decides to attack them. I will calm myself before I proceed. So he attacks him. It turns out it's Maney's battery, one of the best crack artillery outfits in the Confederacy. And it's in essentially the center of the Confederate line. So what General McClernand has done is gone out with a short fishing pole and hit a hornet's nest. Several hundred killed and wounded before we were able to extract and pull back. Grievous loss of life and wounded. And I told him in no uncertain terms, don't do that. Well, on the 13th, on this day, it started raining. And then the rain turned to sleet, that turned to snow. Temperatures plummeted. They didn't drop. They plummeted like a stone. And the men were freezing to death. Sergeant Brenton told me there's going to be a lot of people whose toes and fingers. And they did. And the men that fought there in that battle on both sides remembered that night, those 2 nights, the 13th and the 14th, as long as they lived.
Pardon, General,
Colonel.
our time goes short.
Thank you, Colonel. Be seated. It is wonderful to have this day. Thank you, Colonel. Well, the rain and the sleet, the snow, the ice, the ground became covered with ice. The men were miserable because neither side could have campfire because you give away your position to the enemy. And all those fellas who had thrown away or put aside those gray coats and those blankets were absolutely miserable. The next day, on the 14th, it wasn't any warmer. Well, I've got Andrew Hullfoot. He's steaming up the Cumberland River. 4 ironclads, 2 timberclads, because the Conestoga by this time, the Lexington and the Tyler were there, and the Conestoga had gotten beat up attacking Fort Henry. And the St. Louis, the Louisville, the Carondelet, and the Pittsburgh came up the river. Now, if you've ever been to Fort Donelson, you'll know what I'm talking about. The river with the gun batteries, they had 2 batteries, the lower and the upper, and they were all dug, they were cut into the bank. They're dug out with the guns in the bank. Excellent gunners, they're already sighted in. And if you go there this day, some of those guns were the guns at that time. And not all of them, but there are 2 or 3 that were in the battle. And Foote didn't want to go. He sent a letter back to the Secretary of Navy, Gideon Wells, who didn't like me either. So he thought I was an idiot. And he said, I don't want to go, but Grant's pushing me, he's pressing me. So about 2 or 3 o'clock in the afternoon, he finally sails up. And the rebel gunners are waiting. It was a situation where they're saying, they're picking their teeth and they're saying, just a little closer, just a little closer. And at about 1,000 feet, 400 yards, Foote opened fire. And so did they. And they absolutely tore that fleet up. The naval reports say, and I was sitting on the bank watching this, and I'm thinking, he's going to do the same thing to Fort Donelson that he did to Fort Henry. And then I'm going to march in and take the surrender. And I've got a whole army surrendered. It didn't work out that way. The naval report said that with the gun, his boat, the St. Louis, they call them boats. He told me on the ocean they call them ships, on rivers they call them boats. And the St. Louis, his flagship, was hit, and they were 59 times what they call between wind and water. And that's at the water line, below the water line. Now, you know, ironclads are not armored below the water. They're only armored, what you can see is armored. And the top is not armored. Top's wood. So if you can lob a shell down, it'll go right through the boat. But they said the sheet iron that's about 6 inches thick was flying off those boats like bark off a tree. And the Louisville had its tiller shot away and its rudder shot away, and she was just drifting. The St. Louis with Foote, a solid shot came through the pilot house and their little tent-like thing, metal thing, top of the boat. A shell went through the pilot house, killed the pilot, and injured Admiral Foote. He got hurt in the ankle, severely wounded in the ankle. And then they shot away the tiller rope and shot away the rudder. So the St. Louis is drifting back down. I think the Pittsburgh was also damaged beyond repair and was just drifting in the water. I think it was the Carondelet. Some people say Carondelet, but the Carondelet, as I recall, was the only one left that could fight. No matter who it was, there was only one boat out of 4. The 2 timberclads had already wisely fallen back. As the Confederate prisoners told us, we forevermore tore y'all up. Now my heart sank because I thought, now I've got to go into siege. I've got a siege. I don't want a siege. I want to fight. So I wrote Julia a letter that night and I said, it looks like we're going to be here in a siege and it bids fair to be a long one. Sent that letter to her. And then on the 15th, he sent a note to me about 2 o'clock in the morning. He said, General, I wish to meet with you, and my apologies that I cannot come to you, but I have been wounded. And while it is extremely painful, it does limit my mobility. Can you come to see me? And I said, well, certainly. So about 3 o'clock in the morning, I start picking my way 7 miles over ice that's 4 to 6 inches thick. I was on Jack. He's a good one. He can pick his way. But you're still talking about a 1,500-pound animal on iron hooves, shoes, very slick. So we picked our way. I had William Hilliard with me, my staff. And we finally got to the boat about daybreak. When I left, now see, that's why I said tonight is learning on the job. Now, I certainly hope the United States Army has improved in their training. We keep up with things where I am now. And we're very pleased with what the Army, the military does with their training. Mine was learn on the job. And I learned a galling lesson that day. When I left my headquarters with the Woodard, not Woodard folk, Woodard Rose, well, she's not really a Woodard. The local folks told me that her old man left her about a year before. He'd gone to town to go to the store and never came back. And so out of politeness, they called her widow. But I was at her house, and I said, don't bring on an engagement. made it very clear to McClernand particularly, Lew Wallace and General Smith. But what did I not tell them? What did I not do? Now I know General Scales knows, so he's a ringer, he's not going to say anything. I didn't leave anybody in command. There was nobody on the field who could make a command decision. So I met with Commodore Foote, and he gave me a big cigar. He was an absolute teetotal. The demon rum did not touch his lips. In fact, he's the one who stopped the twice daily grog ration in the United States Navy. He stopped it on his boats, where he was in command, and then the Navy picked up, and they all stopped it. But he loved his good cigars. He gives me a cigar. He tells me, I'm going back to Cairo, taking all my boats back to Cairo, and my heart sank. I said, don't do that. He said, I've got to. They need to be repaired. How long would it take? 10 days. I don't have 10 days, Commander, Commodore. Please don't do that. He said, well, I've got to, Grant. I've got to. Could you leave some of them here? Sail them around the bend, and when you stand there at the water batteries as you're looking down, you can see that little bend. Anchor on the other side of the bend and get up steam. And let the rebels see that steam, that you're still there. If you leave, it'll be a moral victory for them. And he agreed. When I got off the boat, I've got an aide there who says, General, they've attacked. They have attacked in force. Now what the rebels had done is decided that they're going to push McClernand back, open up the Nashville road, and escape to Nashville, which they did. They pushed McClernand back, way back. He kept sending pleas for help, but he was such a buffoon that my aides didn't pay him any attention. Finally, Lew Wallace, who's looking at what's happening, took it on himself at the risk of a court-martial and sent Colonel Thayer, and they moved in between Gideon Pillow and Simon Buckner and McClernand and stopped that, stopped the flow. When I got there, after I'd gone 7 miles, I told my response was, gentlemen, that ground must be retaken. I didn't say retreat, I didn't say dig in. There on Dudley Hill, I made the move that there are those who tell you was the most decisive move of the war, certainly the most decisive decision in my command, my history. I didn't say retreat, I didn't say dig in, I said, gentlemen, that ground must be retaken. Tell your men to fill their ammunition pouches and push them back. I rode back up past Wallace, told him it's all right, glad you did what you did. Got to General Smith and I said, he's sitting under an apple tree, I think it was. He's leaning back up against a tree. His men arrested hadn't been involved. And I rode up to him and I said, General, you must take Fort Donelson. And he said, he slapped his knees and he unfolded up, stood up. He said, I'll do it. He got the 2nd Iowa in the lead. He said, fix bayonets. Don't load your weapons. Fix bayonets. Do not put a cap on the nipple. Do not stop and fire. Once we start moving, we are going into those trenches. When we get there, you may be able to use your weapon. And I'm thinking, this man is about to do a bayonet charge in February of 1862. And he did. And he also said, well, as one, you'll have to forgive me, I do not swear. Never said a swear word in my life. I've got Sherman and Rawlins to do that for me. But I will tell you something about what General Smith said. He said, come on, you sons of bitches, you volunteered to die for your country, and today's a good day to do it. Fix bayonets. 2nd Iowa forward. And he overran the lines because, you see, I knew if they had that many men in front of McClernand, they had to be weak up here. And the only thing that stopped him going all the way to Fort Donelson was nightfall. And then Buckner was able to get back up and cover his lines of dead. I'm ready to attack the next morning. And then about 4 o'clock in the morning, Smith comes in, woke me up. I was lying on the floor next to the fireplace, wood of crisp. I said Rose, wood of crisp. He woke me up and said, "Grant, got something for you." I said, "What is it, General?" I was sitting in that cane bottom straight back chair. He's sitting there. You need to understand, as I bring my remarks to a close, you need to understand the geography, the geometry of the scene. He's standing next to me in front of the little fire, and I'm looking up at him like this. And it said, appointing, I said, "What do they want?" He said, "Bah, they want to appoint commissioners for surrender, to talk about surrendering." And see, Buckner had been one of his students too. Buckner was a year behind me. And I said, "What do you think, General?" He said, "Bah, no terms for the damned rebels, but unconditional surrender. Bah!" And I said, "That sounds good. Bring me pencil and paper." So I would love to claim that little witticism, but it came from Charles Ferguson Smith. And I wrote, "Unconditional, immediate unconditional, I proposed immediately new upon your work, so forth." And I was surprised, though, that Buckner signed it. See, I thought Pillow was in command. And I went in and took the surrender. The night before, though, in one of the greatest fiascos in military history, John Floyd, Gideon Pillow, Simon Bolivar Buckner, Bedford Forrest, and Bushrod Johnson. Actually, Bushrod was outside. Bushrod walked off in the darkness. He just walked off in the darkness to fight another day. But Floyd said, "I'm a wanted man, they'll execute me. I'm going to turn over command to Gideon Pillow." And of course, Gideon Pillow's like this. He said, "Oh, General, do you see anything wrong with me giving up command?" And Buckner standing there like this. He's a professional soldier and a good one. And he said, "No, sir, you must follow your heart." "Well, I'm going to leave too. And what are you going to do?" Buckner said, "I'm going to suffer the fate of my men." And he sent me the note. Now, John Floyd, the people that would be the most angry in this whole fiasco was those 3,000 Mississippi troops that had just steamed up and disembarked the boat. John Floyd takes his Virginians back on the boat. Of course, the Mississippi troops are looking, we just got off. What are these guys doing getting back on? And they steamed off to Nashville. And those Mississippi troops surrendered the next day. So we were in possession of Fort Donelson. And I think the greatest mistake Sidney Johnston made was he did not go to Donelson himself to command. It would have been no different if he had surrendered and been captured with the rest of the troops. But it was a tremendous error on his part, for which the Confederacy paid dearly, because that was the first domino. The South was never able to get its bearing again for the rest of the other 3 years of the war. Now, I said all I need to say. Madam President, what would you have us do now?
About a couple of questions.
John back there has you got the hand up first, and I'll repeat the question. Yes, sir.
This roundtable has its own Facebook page, and today it posted a picture of a wounded soldier crawling through fire. The woods were ablaze, and it said, "This is Fort Donelson." And I didn't understand about that because you had ice on the ground, everything was wet.
No, the journalists sometimes obfuscate things, don't they? I sort of hope they get over that. No, there were no fires at Fort Donelson. They wanted to fill some, they call them column lines, and they wanted to fill them. So that was, like the first, after Donelson fell, one of the Chicago papers, I think the Chicago Tribune, had the whole front of the paper, both sides. the great Victor Grant. Only it wasn't me. It was a rather corpulent fellow who was bald and a beard, and he had a uniform on. What they'll do is they've got the engravers, they've got the uniform, so they'll put a different head or face on the uniform. But this fellow was a meat packer in Chicago, who it really was, and I had a laugh out of that. But no, there were no fires there at Donelson, not even any campfires. Who else would have, you got?
I have a
and
link
then,
for you if you'd like a mint.
if you don't mind me clicking my
No,
mint,
I don't mind.
if it wouldn't bother y'all, yes, sir.
Was it one of the largest surrenders of the war?
No, it was not. It were about the nearest we can figure, and I must needs speak in vagaries because nobody knows. The nearest we can figure is 15,000 men surrendered. Army records say like 15,500 were ultimately put on boats and sent to prison camps up north. Now, Buckner said they had, one time they had 21,000, then they got down to 17 by the time we surrendered. I had never taken, nobody's ever taken an army and surrendered. So again, I'm learning on the job. I didn't put up any perimeter security guards. Well, that's when Bushrod Johnson walks off. Several hundred, if not several thousand men just melted away into the woods.
Forrest, how many did he take?
He took out, as we could figure, 700 to 1,000. He said, I didn't come here to, well, he said several things. He said, I didn't come here to surrender. These mothers trusted me with their sons and husbands. And I don't think surrendering is what they had in mind. And I'll tell you, the road to Nashville is still open. I just saw it. If you'll get up in March, we can all escape. But then Floyd and Phil were too busy heading to the river, so we kept it on. Yes, ma'am.
When you were talking about the 2nd Iowa, were you talking about the 2nd Iowa Infantry or Division?
2nd Iowa Infantry.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Did you and General Buckner ever reconcile after the war?
Did General Buckner and I ever reconcile? Yes, we did. Buckner, after he was released, now I did offer him my purse, and he turned it down. He went to Richmond and fought in some artillery. Had a colonel's rank because he couldn't give him another general's rank after he surrendered Donelson. So he fought the war as a colonel. Now, I need to slip time a little bit. Is that all right with you folks? Let's go to July of 1885 when I am dying of epithelial throat cancer, cancer at the base of the tongue. July 17th, 18th. Buckner had remarried. His first wife had died, and he remarried a 25-year-old girl, young lady. And they were on their honeymoon at Niagara Falls. I was at McGregor Cottage at Wilton, New York, which is just a short distance from Niagara Falls. Buckner, who'd been governor of Kentucky and was a newspaper editor, came down to visit with one family member to ever see me alive. I could no longer speak. So I'm writing my replies and my statements on little slips of blue paper. And as Buckner's reading them, he's putting them in his pocket. I don't think with any intent, but he just kept the papers. I was fortunate enough several years ago to meet a great-great-grandson. Now, you know Simon Bolivar Buckner's son was the highest-ranking American officer killed in World War II in Okinawa. And that's not his grandson, that's his son. Now, President John Tyler's youngest son died in the last 20 years. Look it up. I can't give you a specific date, but President John Tyler had a son that lived well into the 20th century. But Simon Buckner was killed in Okinawa.
Didn't General Buckner, the first one, pay for Grant's funeral?
No, they contributed some. There was no payment for the funeral. It was an honor felt an honor to participate in that. But Buckner kept the papers. His great-grandson, I ran into a retired Marine Corps, ran into him over there at Donelson, and of course he saw me, and we got to talking, and I said, what happened to those blue slips in Grant's handwriting? He said, we had them in the family for more than 100 years. He said, they're now in a museum. They have been turned over to a museum, which is where they should be. Who else has got? Let's do one or two. Is that okay, Madam President? Two more. Yes, ma'am.
Did you ever have the pleasure of crossing paths with Colonel William Lyon of Wisconsin at Donelson, or did he arrive after you were gone?
I think he arrived after I was gone. I don't remember that name. William Lyon of Wisconsin. Don't remember him. I don't want to slight him, but it doesn't come to mind.
At the time of being at Fort Donelson, you were still under a lot of pressure to prove yourself, were you not? And how much were you in, if I got this information correct in my mind anyhow, how much did you feel that, and how much do you think that might have impacted your feeling that even more of being successful in this campaign against Fort Donelson?
Felt no specific pressure, except the pressure of combat and putting together an assault. Had no extra pressure. We put the men in the field, and let's do this, let's do that, and let us prevail. And that's how I handled it. Yes, ma'am.
Now, one final question.
Igor,
you're up.
Private Igor Batchin, Cadet Private Igor Batchin, Junior ROTC. Welcome him. This is the future of our past and our military. Welcome him. Yes, sir, Igor.
I was just wondering, when you mentioned the artillery transport around the enemy, how come the enemy hasn't heard the artillery coming around? Was there a specific way that that the artillery was transported in behind it to defeat them?
By mule and horse. They had to pull those tubes, and some of them, I understand some of them came from South Carolina, if I remember correctly, but they were brought by train, wagon, horse, and mule, and hoisted up onto the gun carriages where you see them today at the fort. Hard work, hard work. I must needs bring my presence with you this night to an end, as much as I regret it. I'm going to make good on my promise. Your buttocks and your brain are connected. And I'm not going to work my welcome. I want you to ask me back. Thank you.
Anyway, we want to give General Grant yet another. You're going to have a whole squad of guys here.
These are the neatest awards that I get from anybody I speak to. These got more of them than I do. Thank you. U.S. Officer Infantry, 1863. I will leave it here for all to enjoy before we leave. Thank you.